I'm Steve Wilkerson, and I'm with Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. Jim, the proposed constitutional amendment to allow the use of marijuana for medical purposes will be on the ballot in the fall. It was passed by the Supreme Court or approved by the Supreme Court, and people are speculating about the political ripple effects of this being on the ballot. Talk about that a little bit.
It's going to be really interesting to see how the candidates and the parties take positions on this issue. There's a lot of thought that this could help Charlie Crist, whoever the Democratic nominee is for governor, because it could motivate some young voters to go to the polls, which the assumption is that would help Democrats. It's also going to be interesting to see how Republicans handle the issue. The polls so far are showing that this thing is going to pass, that there is pretty strong support for it. And, they are going to have to weigh whether, traditionally the say no to drugs has sort of been the mantra around. And it's going to be really interesting to see if they can pivot off that or if they want to pivot off that. Attorney General Pam Bondi fought the proposed amendment in the Supreme Court. She fought it on the basis of a legal issue, which is the wording of the ballot. And she was asked about it later, and she said that she will personally continue to oppose the amendment. She'll vote against it, and she'll be on the ballot this year. But, and it'll be interesting to see. One of her opponents, Democratic opponents, George Sheldon, made very clear that he would support it. So I think we're going to see this in the races as one of these issues that people are taking positions on. It's not just a young issue either. I mean, there's a lot of baby boomers who have partaken over the years, who this may not be such a taboo issue for older voters, including some older Republicans. And
the President of the United States seems to say, well, maybe we'll turn a blind eye to some places that are not enforcing the federal law.
Well, this is, the states across the country are moving to legalize marijuana in various, it's various degrees, if you will. But so it's becoming something that's almost moving, I don't want to say in the mainstream, but politically it's an issue that's popping up all over the place.
And really, Jim, it doesn't look like there will be any serious, organized resistance against the passage of this amendment.
We have not seen any yet, and that doesn't mean it can't, come up in the next several months. Law enforcement has been opposed to it. The law enforcement organizations have been opposed. Now, how much time, money, effort they may put into actually fighting it, I think remains to be seen. On the side of the pro side of it, John Morgan, the trial lawyer in Orlando, who has basically largely bankrolled this whole to get it on the ballot, you got to figure he and will have, as well as supporters, will be out there spending money to try to get it passed.
Well, on another subject, this past week, the Associated Press hosted its annual luncheon for people like you and editors and writers from around the state. And former Governor Charlie Crist, he was a Republican at one time, governor, and now it looks like the leading candidate for governor on the Democrat side, came out swinging, big broadside, boom, right at current governor, Republican Governor Rick Scott. Talk about that. You were there. He really came out swinging. Talk about it.
Well, he's pretty much indicated, or it seems to be indicating, he is just going to go after Rick Scott on ethics or sort of ethical issues. And it all goes back to when Rick Scott was the CEO of Columbia HCA Hospital Company. And short time after he left the company, it had to pay $1.7 billion in a settlement because of Medicaid and Medicare fraud. Now, this was an issue 4 years ago when Rick Scott ran for governor, but Crist is just really going after him on it. In addition to this AP event, the Crist campaign has put out a web ad that's all it's about, is questioning Rick Scott's ethics and his, what essentially saying, should we really have this guy as our governor of our state? And so if that's the tack they're taking at this point, I have a feeling we're going to see that pretty much for the next 10 or in 9 months as the campaign unfolds.
Well, they also questioned him on his stewardship of Florida's environment.
Yeah, he is, I think he's sort of, Governor Scott has tried to make some inroads on environmental issues recently. And, former Governor Christ contends he has a very long history, going back to when he was a kid, of being an environmental supporter, and that Governor Scott is sort of, using it as a political issue to try to, curry favor. So that's another issue that I think could be fairly prominent. It's particularly down around the Everglades, Lake Okeechobee, those areas. There's a lot of water issues down there that could come into play in this campaign.
On the other side of the coin, what have been the main lines of attack from Governor Scott and Republicans directed toward former Republican governor, now Democratic candidate for governor, Charlie Crist?
Well, that was one of the nice parts about being at this AP event. They have it every year. But we got to see both candidates, and we got to see Nan Rich, who's another Democrat running. But it was interesting just to see them they weren't together, but we got to see both of them. And it is clear that Rick Scott is going to go after Charlie Crist's leadership of the state while he was governor. He talked about Crist supporting $2 billion in tax cuts, which is going to be juxtaposed with Governor Scott, who's pushing for $500 million in tax and fee cuts this year. He's also, he's also kind of intimating that Charlie Crist was the governor when, the economy went down the tubes, and that, that Charlie Crist is somehow responsible for that. And meanwhile, Rick Scott is bringing the state back with jobs. So it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of attacks on the way Crist ran the state and tried to solve the problems at that time.
What we can say for certain is that there will be a lot of attacks, period.
Yeah,
it's going to be an ugly scenario.
Yeah, this is going to be, it's going to be months and months of negative advertising. Governor Scott is going to have as much money as he needs to try to get his message out. It's a little unclear at this point how much money former Governor Crist is going to have, but he'll probably have enough to get his message out.
Thank you, Jim. For more news about Florida politics and government, visit the Advances section of our website.